In this next video, I'm going to go through the basics module to just talk about the global adjustments that you would want to make on an image that you're shooting in RAW before you would do any selective adjustments or begin to work on the image in Photoshop. In this particular example, what we're eventually going to be doing with this particular image is we're going to be taking this photograph and we are going to use the eyes that are open to replace the eyes on this one that are closed, and the lighting on this one is a little bit better. That's going to be our end goal. But before we do any of that, what we have to do is we have to make sure that we're doing our basic adjustments to the image in Lightroom. So I'm going to work on this one because this is actually going to be the main image, so the clothing and the stool and the backdrop and most of the figure is going to be from this particular image. And I'm going to go into the basics panel, and I've already done the lens correction, I've already done the chromatic aberration checkboxes. And the next step would be to go through the workflow, starting basically from the top. Of course, if you want to set from color to black and white, you would do the option here. But we are not going to be working on it in black and white, so I'm just going to leave it in color. The next option that you have is to work on the color temperature. This particular image was shot in the studio where the lights are approximately about 5,000 to 5,500 Kelvin, which is the basis of the numbers over here. And as you can see, it's pretty close. So, and just looking at the image, it doesn't need too much adjustment. But if you wanted to kind of warm it up or cool it down a little bit, you could do so with the sliders. Of course, you can always use your white balance selector, in which case if you have an area of the image that you know you want to be a neutral, you pick up the white balance tool with a click of the mouse and drag it onto something that you know you want to be neutral gray. Now this doesn't always work, and something that you want to be white, black, or neutral gray. Something that you don't want any color to be in it. And this particular shirt that Logan's wearing, it might actually have kind of more of a cream color to it than actually a pure white. So I could try to use it, and it kind of cools it off a little bit too much because it's trying to take his cream colored shirt and make it a little too white. So I'm actually probably going to kind of mess around with that a little bit more to get it a little bit more neutral. But that sometimes works really well for some of your images, so know that that particular white balance slider is there in your toolkit. The next step that I want you guys to be working on would be the exposure slider. And the exposure slider is meant for midtones only, because if you want to adjust your shadows and your highlights, you're going to be doing that on a separate slider below. So when you're looking at an image, you kind of want to see where your kind of midtone structure is. And we can see here we have a lot of midtones in this particular image on our histogram. So the original exposure looks pretty good, so I'm probably not going to adjust this too much. I might just kind of look at maybe his skin tone, some of this shadow area here that's a little lighter, like on the neck. Kind of the backdrop is sort of the middle tone. So if I wanted to lighten that up a little bit or darken it, I could, and I might just go a little touch lighter with it by just about 1/4 of a stop. I recommend skipping the contrast slider because the contrast slider will also increase or decrease your color saturation, and I generally like to make sure that when I'm using a slider, I'm only affecting one variable at a time. It also has you do contrast kind of overall, which you can do it in a more refined way lower down by using just the highlights and the shadows separately. So I skip the contrast slider. When I come to the highlights in this particular image, I could sort of zoom in on the face and see if I have really blown out highlights that are maybe a little too bright. I can see from my histogram that I don't have any clipped highlights, which is good, but I might just experiment and see what it looks like if I bring that down just a little bit to get a bit more skin tone in there, and maybe bring that down a little bit. And then I could move on to the shadow areas, And this one I definitely want to bring up a bit because I think a lot of the information kind of in the pants on the right side of the face gets a little lost. So I'm going to bring that up a little bit more aggressively. And then underneath the white and the black sliders, this again should be used with your Alt key or the Option key, because what this will do with that is that when you use the slider and you click on it, it shows you what is pure white or pure black. And then with the white slider, we can see that it's completely black right now, so there's no pure white. But sometimes what is helpful is to bring it up to see where you would start to get the very first things of white. And as you see, it's his shirt. And I don't want that to be pure white, because if I do, I can see when I take my finger off the Alt button, it's really blown out and really kind of lost. But sometimes if you have a detail in your image that you do want it to be kind of really bright, sort of a spectral highlight, you can bring that over. And then what I recommend if this is going to be going to a print is actually bringing it down then a little bit so that you don't literally have pixels that are 255, because pixels that are 255 won't print any ink on the paper. So when you're making a print, it's very rare that you would ever want something to actually be true white, but you can bring that up or down depending on what you want those whitest of highlights to be. Then the same thing with the black. If you are making a print of something, then it's usually good to be really thoughtful about where the darkest part of your image is. And when I click on the Alt button, I see that I maybe have a few little dots of black that show up around the shoes. But if I wanted to kind of bring out a little bit more contrast in the image, then I could bring that down a little bit to make some of the pants a true black. So that would be going from about, let's see, here down to about -18 on this particular image. Now, if you ever want to see what the before and after looks like of the image that you first were looking at as the raw image to the image that has the global adjustments on it that you've done, it's the / key, and then you can see the before and after. And in this particular example, I've just kind of brightened up those shadows a bit. I've brought down the highlights for a little bit more detail, and that is the basics of the global adjustments that I'm going to be working on.